This is where, by law, I have to ask you to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. That sort of thing helps us in the algorithm, apparently. Also, comments. YouTube likes it when people talk. If you want to support the show more directly, then please consider helping out in the Patreon. There's all kinds of rewards, including bonus videos and requests. But if you're not in a position to help out and can only watch, don't feel bad. Everyone's hurting. And thank you for the views. Welcome to my third Out of the Unknown video, a 1960s BBC anthology sci-fi show, where most of the episodes are based on short stories and novels. And they're mostly not too heavily rewritten. So if you want to know what old sci-fi was like without reading it, then just get an audiobook, or you can watch this. This video contains the last two episodes of Series 1 before we enter the desolation of Series 2. And not in a it's bad kind of way. Most of the surviving episodes come from Series 1, so there's a lot of dead episodes out there kind of way. Series 1 episode 11 is 13 to Centaurus by J.G. Ballard, and it's not so much a singular short story as several in a space trench coat, but it adapts them all. Ballard has one of the most varied careers of any of the writers adapted in the show. He was born in Shanghai to English parents in 1930 and lived through the Japanese occupation, spending years in an internment camp. He would later write Empire of the Sun about his experiences. He would also write stuff as varied as Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan, as a deliberately obscene pretend scientific study about people being turned on by Ronald Reagan. It was the late 60s. People were high, hopefully. He also wrote Crash, the car-fucking book, that David Cronenberg turned into a car-fucking film, and High Rise, about societal collapse in an apartment block, whose movie adaptation spent 45 years in production hell before finally being released in 2015. It took him so long to make it that not only Classic Who, but David Cronenberg had already done their own unauthorized riffs on the concept. For a guy who's not exactly a mainstream name, his work has been varied and has lasted. Just a few years ago, his The Drowned Giant was made into an episode of Love, Death and Robots. But one of the reasons that Ballard's work has lasted, I suspect, was his willingness to go a little more extreme than many of his contemporaries. It allowed him to be ahead of the curve when it came to what people found acceptable. To compare him to someone like Asimov was so very ahead of his time in so many ways, like with science. But he was also stuck in his time when it came to certain other things, like woman. While Ballard's work laid the groundwork for cyberpunk and was embraced by goth, punk and industrial bands. Anyway, the irony here is that 13 to Centaurus is one of Ballard's more traditional mid-20th century sci-fi short stories. You get some of his darkness and dystopia, but no more than you'd get with any number of other writers. Though it's also very possible that the BBC toned it down somewhat for the adaptation, but I've not been able to find a copy of the short story to confirm. 13 to Centaurus is set in a generation ship, a spaceship where generations of people are born, live and die while en route to a far-off alien planet. The main character is Dr. Francis, the wise psychiatrist, tasked with looking after the crew's well-being. Humans aren't meant to spend their whole lives trapped in a ship the size of a small building after all. He uses a machine to condition and program the crew to keep their minds and emotions balanced, focused on the specialized tasks, and to destroy any wishes to leave or disrupt the fragile equilibrium of the ship. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to spoil this. This is revealed very early on, and to properly talk about the episode, I need to tell you this. So skip forward to Heen, and miss most of the discussion if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, now that they're gone, the ship isn't a ship, it's not even in space, it's on Earth. The governments of the Earth wanted to know how humans would react to a generation ship, and so decades ago set up a giant experiment, and Dr. Francis knows about it. He interacts with the outside world and is horrified to discover that they're planning on pulling the plug.
Project Alpha Centauri will be discontinued.
I don't think you can know what you're saying, General.
To make things even more complicated, the captain has recently died, and Francis has chosen Abel, a young genius in the crew, as his eventual replacement. So he's begun using the conditioning machine to explain things to him, to properly condition him for the role. Unfortunately, Abel is smarter, more cunning, manipulative, and much madder than he ever dreamed. Think of this as an early simulation story. The crew are living in a fishbowl, a kitsch fishbowl, watched by the outside world. And the outside world, also kitsch, is being watched by us. A layered simulation, long before virtual reality. This is another story that makes the best use of the artificiality of the studio sets, all cramped and claustrophobic, an odd mix of dated and weirdly believable. Flimsy looking, yes, but a lot of space tech looks kinda flimsy. I love the crew costumes too, like a modern Star Trek uniform with touches of fetish wear. Anyway, this is an excellent piece of work, depressing, quietly horrifying as it slowly dawns that there is no escape, like a slow hanging with a short rope. Highly recommended. The last story in Series 1 is The Midas Plague by Frederik Pohl. Born in 1919, Pohl was a passionately political writer and unabashedly left-wing. He was even the head of his local Young Communist League, until he left in disgust with him supporting the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that briefly aligned the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Pohl had joined the Young Communist League partly because of their opposition to fascism, a view that he put into practice when he served in World War II. He spent much of his early career in writing, but not as a writer himself. He was Isaac Asimov's agent for a while and edited several sci-fi magazines, writing under some pseudonyms until he eventually started writing under his own name. He had a 75-year career, winning 4 Nebulas and 3 Hugos, and in 1998 he was the 10th person indicted into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. Not all his work has an overt left-wing bent, but both of the stories adapted for Out of the Unknown do. Starting with something kinda unique, The Midas Plague. You see, while the show had dabbled with humour beforehand, most obviously with some bits from Come Buttercup, Come Daisy, Come, The Midas Plague is a full-on comedy, though the comedy is heightened compared to the original short story. The Midas Plague is set in the future, a world of automation, where there's more than enough for everyone, and unlike in real life, it's actually distributed. However, it has its own oppressive class system. You see, it's a post-scarcity society, and automation in production is so cheap and efficient that the economy literally runs on producing more and more things, and slowing down would cause the whole thing to derail.
This country is overproducing. Our automatic factories, our robots are making much too much of everything, and it has to be consumed. Want not, Murray. Waste not.
So the poor are given more and more things to consume, more food to eat, more clothes to wear out, more pointless gadgets, more furniture to use, more robots to serve them, with punishments if you don't fulfill your quotas.
Not if black marks come from the ration office saying that you are lazy, slothful, failing in your duty as a consumer citizen of the state.
It's a fascinating idea of what happens if post-scarcity is achieved without serious societal change. The signs of wealth and success are living simply. The story follows Maury Anderson, a low-level worker with a wife from a rich family. She's used to the less complicated things in life and hates consuming, so for the sake of a quiet life, Maury has to consume her allocation too.
You could give me some kind of love.
I haven't got time for love. I'm too busy consuming.
Well, consume me.
Time for tea, sir.
Oh, go away, Henry.
To make things worse, if you catch the ire of the government, say by not consuming enough, they will increase your ration until it's a spiralling collapse.
But, my lord, if you just let me explain...
And ordered to consume 7 dozen cases of whiskey within 14 days.
And I'm not even touching on most of the plot because it goes places. Zany places, which mostly make sense in context. And if this sounds like an early, deranged episode of Black Mirror, that's because it pretty much is.
You are hereby reduced from Class 7 consumer to Class 10. And the privilege of working for your living will be completely taken away from you.
But, Dad...
Kindly call me my lord.
As a concept, it does sound ridiculous, and it's depicted ridiculously, but I think it's a bit more realistic than a lot of visions of the future. Class systems are inherently insane, and social signifiers of wealth have changed wildly through time and space, depending on what was common and what was scarce. Right now, tans and being thin are signs of wealth and success, but tans used to mean that you were poor and worked in the fields, and being fat was a sign of wealth. You could afford a lot of food. What happens when everyone has more than enough? Consuming it becomes a sign that you're poor. Anyway, there's a bunch of nice world building in this. My favourite is the cat burglar, who's paid by the desperate poor to break into their homes, take their mountains of stuff, and put it in someone else's house.
So if I gave you something, you could take all this lot and, dump it somewhere else. Oh, I don't know. Cost you a fortune getting rid of all this lot.
Now, there are a few issues with this, such as the lack of fat actors playing the poor. I mean, the law forces them to keep eating more and more and more. And the music's also kinda rough. It's a zany Hammond organ score. Fine in small doses, but this doesn't do anything in small doses. Honestly, I wonder if the music was a reference to the world being filled with pointless, inane crap. Anyway, what's really bad is the design of the robots. I'm guessing it was deliberate because there's a number of episodes that feature robots, and these are by far the worst looking. Given the tone of the story, what happens in it, and the amount of them on screen at times, I'm pretty sure some scenes have about 20 of them. I think they made the choice to go a bit crap as a style. I doubt the budget could have handled anything better. The writer of the adaptation was Troy Kennedy Martin. Not a household name, but he's a very weird choice for this script. He created the first important British police show, Z-Cars, wrote the original Italian Job, the historical spy epic Riley Ace of Spies, which is fantastic, the Arnie movie Red Heat, and Michael Mann's Ferrari, released 15 years after his death. None of this exactly screams socialist science fiction satire, but still he mostly pulls it off. The original short story was American, but this version feels very British, dealing with social as well as financial class. But one tiny scene betrays its origins, as it briefly touches on segregation, as a robot wants to be served in a bar and is refused.
I am sorry, I am not programmed to serve alcohol to machines. Are you calling me a machine, you dirty robot? You are a machine.
That's not a massive deal, I just thought it was interesting. An originally British version of the story probably wouldn't have included that, because racial segregation like that was never legal in the UK.
I am not a machine. I am a robot, and I am proud that I am a robot.
One contemporary reviewer described the Midas Plague as 1984 in reverse, with humour rather than horror. And it's an excellent description. Anyway, this is mostly fantastic. The comedy's a bit crap, the music is annoying, the robots are terrible looking, and it does kind of fall apart in the end. These sound like big complaints, but they really don't overpower the rest of the episode. Series 2 opens up with a banger, The Machine Stops by Ian Forster, and if you recognise the name, yes, that one. He's easily the odd one out when it comes to writers adapted for the show because he's not a sci-fi writer. Forster was a mainstream, famous writer and one of the most ridiculously British people ever lived. He wrote A Room with a View, Howard's End, Passage to India and Maurice. And he was a literal Victorian, born in 1879. The British Empire and the foibles of the rich pricks who were in it was common fare in his work. But don't get me wrong, he wasn't a fan of it. He was a humanist, socialist, anti-censorship, and kind of openly gay when it was illegal. His novel Maurice caused a bit of a firestorm because it was a love affair between a rich guy and his shudder-gasp male gardener. The Machine Stops was the first screen adaptation of his work and the only adaptation done in his lifetime because he refused to allow film adaptations. Because with cinema, Americans tend to get involved. And this isn't him being a British prick or anything, it was him getting really pissed off at American foreign policy. Because, as wild as this sounds, Forster lived long enough to see stuff like the Vietnam War. Anyway, The Machine Stops. It was written in 1909 and is by far the oldest story adapted in this show, and one of the most prescient. It's often referred to as Forster's only sci-fi, but I've also seen references to Forster's last short story, a little red piece called Little Ember, that's apparently also sci-fi, but I've not been able to confirm that. The Machine Stops depicts the far future. Humanity live a completely atomized existence, living in individual homes underground. They are provided with food, warmth, clothing, entertainment, everything they need. They have instant communications with anyone they wish to talk to, and rarely leave their homes unless they are assigned to go somewhere else to procreate, or are given another home. Everything is provided by a massive planet-spanning machine created generations before. Its influence is so complete that people even worship at. It is Mother, it is Father, it is God. It even creates art and entertainment for everyone. But what happens when the machine stops? When piece by piece, it begins to die. The main characters are mother and son, Vashti and Kuno. She's conservative, dedicated to the machine. Unlike a good citizen, she wants a normal, distant relationship with her son. Kuno is rebellious, willfully questioning, and trains his body in contravention of the machine's rules. People are to be as weak and harmless and docile as possible. If people rebel, they risk homelessness, being ejected from society to the surface of the earth, where death awaits. and I'm not going to tell you anything else to do with the plot, you'll need to see it for yourself. This got a bit of attention back in 2020 with COVID for its vision of a global society of completely atomized individuals, rarely even talking face to face, in perpetual lockdown. The design work is on another level compared to basically everything else the BBC produced in the 60s, 70s, hell, well into the 21st century. Look at these shots. The wild riff on medieval clothing, the androgynous shaven head on Vashti, the pulsing membranes, the phallic arms of the machine, making it seem organic and further blurring the line between it and humanity. The design's strongest element is its timelessness, because so little is typical 1960s, so little is dated. Most of the designs could be reused today and it would still work. But the design's not the only part of this where they went all out. The directing is just spectacular, feeling more like a mad hybrid of a Brechtian theatre play and a proper cinema film. I mean, look at this shot of Vashti, superimposed with Kuno climbing a ladder to the outside world. She's worried about its future, even though she's not supposed to be. And he's proving her right. That shot is a bit of mad genius. And check out the staccato editing in this section.
Kuno. Men made it, do not forget that. Men made it, men made it.
I want you to come and...
I dislike.
That is not TV editing. That's closer to New Wave or even art house editing. And then shortly afterwards, Vashti breaks the fourth wall because the cameras that we're watching this through are part of the machine. The sheer dedication in this production was insane. They even went so far as to create duplicate sets for convenience when filming. You see, they used them for Vashti and Kuno's FaceTime discussions, and they even built an intercom into the set so they could hear each other and perform in real time, which let them do these long, unbroken shots, and allowed them to superimpose these performances that were done together separately into one shot.
I guess they just don't make them like they used to, huh?
No! Nobody ever made them like this. I mean, the architect was either a certified genius or an authentic wacko.
This is the episode where they went all out and basically everything worked. Possibly the best hour of sci-fi TV in British history. I know that is a massive thing for me to say, but there you go.
There's a rumour that euthanasia too is out of action, and that pain and suffering have reappeared among men.
Impossible, I cannot believe it.
This is actually one of the few episodes that we have a reaction from the author. Ian Forster sent a letter to producer Irene Shubik after seeing it, and it's in the BBC's archives. Forster loved it, and thought it was more affecting than the original short story. So that's nice. There's been a few other adaptations of The Machine Stops. The most interesting are a short film called Plug in 1998, and another called The Machine Stops from 2009. There's also the odd play, and usually they all make the same mistake that this didn't. They make the world inside the machine unpleasant, frightening even. While this makes it look pleasant, inviting even, because why else would people stay long enough to get into this position? Why would they defend it so vehemently? Okay, yeah, basic psychology, people get invested in terrible things all the time, but it really damages the story if the audience don't, on some level, want to be in the machine. Oh, and there's also a Hawkwind album, which just fucking rules.
A generation seraphically free from the taint of personality.
Anyway, how ahead of its time is this? The mother considers suicide because she thinks less people are watching her YouTube videos. Her job is delivering lectures to a never-seen audience, and when fewer people are watching, she considers suicide.
I asked for euthanasia again today.
Why?
My lecture was unsuccessful.
I and all other YouTubers feel so seen.
Were you refused?
Yes. Though there was never a more unfortunate woman than myself.
Most science fiction TV at least tries to portray something recognizable. If the story is wholly divorced from the norm, they usually try to make the future or alien world look or feel modern, so to not alienate the audience, to not freak them out, to give them a handrail. The Machine Stops doesn't give a fuck about any of that, and it's all the better for it. The Machine Stops is not only probably the best episode of the show, it's easily the episode I'm most glad survived. Because it's not only excellent, eerily prescient, historically important and unique, it looks fantastic, and it's one of the few times the show went all out in designing the future. Nothing in this is unchanged from the present day or ripped from 1950s pulp covers. If you see one episode of this show, make it this one. Series 2 Episode 2 is Frankenstein Mark II, one of the biggest losses in the BBC's fire-based archiving system. I'll eventually be doing a separate video on lost and semi-lost episodes, where I'll cover the most interesting, and this will be raved about. Series 2 Episode 3 is Lambda 1, based on the short story of the same name by Colin Kapp, one of the more obscure writers to be adapted, and his only screen adaptation. Though according to the Sci-Fi Encyclopedia, his work did inspire a text-based computer game about 45 years ago. Early in his career, Kapp mostly wrote short stories, but eventually evolved into novels such as the Cage World series by Dyson Spheres. Kapp was an engineer specialising in electroplating and tended to write about what he knew, so as a result his work was often tech-heavy with heroic engineers. He seems to have retired from writing sci-fi in the 1980s and he died in 2007. Lambda 1 is the inverse of The Machine Stops. Everything went wrong. It's about a highly specialised form of public transport. Transport of people is put out of phase with reality and sent through the centre of the Earth, using something called the Tau process. But what happens when the transport breaks down partway through, and you need to try and rescue them? Freaky shit happens! This is kinda maddening. The plot is simple, extremely simple. It could even work as a decent New Who Doctor Who plot. But Kapp insists on explaining it with jargon that starts off nearly incomprehensible and goes from there. Layers upon layers of people doing things that you don't have much context for, explaining highly technical stuff that they're doing to other people, and we're expected to remember it all. It's like a thriller written in the style of an instruction manual.
Mode slip isn't a very usual phenomenon with vessels of the Electron class, is it?
It's the generators.
But it isn't usual.
Of course it isn't. The whole history of Tau's been a progression towards stability.
For instance, there are multiple modes of travelling through the planet of different levels of danger. We're introduced to them all at the start, and we're expected to remember them all, their level of danger, and be affected when people yell about them entering and leaving them.
The great grey-green of the Gamma. The rose-pink incorruptible of Delta and Epsilon.
Requesting out phase. But what do we do about this?
Omega.
Of course, there are other things we could talk about if you prefer. The principles of Tau physics.
Oh, for God's sake, Eric.
No, seriously, I've never properly understood them.
Having said all that, if you stop trying to follow the science of what's going on, which, based on Kapp's day job, I am guessing makes internal sense, if you try and stop following that and just enjoy the freaky shit, it is actually a lot of fun. In a previous video I mentioned how the show eventually started playing with tones, and this, coming so soon after The Machine Stops and the Midas Plague, proves it quite handily. The Midas Plague was a comedy, The Machine Stops was a masterpiece, and this is sometimes a deranged expressionist horror film, 1920 style. Just check out the imagery on screen. Cheap? Yes. Studio-bound? Yes. But striking and beautiful in its own way. Fun fact, this is the only episode of the show that filmed outside the UK. They did a couple of days second unit shooting in Morocco to create some of the desolate vistas that apparently exist between atoms at the centre of the planet. Anyway, another issue is that the stricken transport and the control offices at Tau headquarters look pretty similar, and we're introduced to so many characters that it's very easy to lose track of who's where, who's who, and what's what. It's a complicated script about something inherently kind of incomprehensible, reality that's not, on a TV budget, and it's even directed kinda muddily, making the whole thing a fascinating mess. And on top of that, you get shots of transports which look like models, and you get shots of model transports. And I'm sure they use the same models for both, meaning sometimes you're not even sure what you're looking at. This sees the return of Ronald Lewis from some lapse in time, this time as Eric Benedict, one of the men tasked with trying to rescue the transport. The other lead is Sebastian Beeks as Paul Porter. His wife and child are on board. And all you'll notice about them are the hilarious giant chains around their necks, and the haircuts that look like wigs, but I'm pretty sure aren't. This was actually quite heavily rewritten from the original story to try and make it filmable. Clearly, they're only partly successful. They also made some other changes for flavour. For instance, a brief mention about the creator of Tau being driven insane and becoming a religious maniac due to exposure to Tau has been handed over to the stricken transport captain instead. This was considered for Series 1, but it was decided that it was too complicated, and they weren't wrong. It was also the most expensive episode of the show, and clearly it wasn't anywhere near expensive enough. I mean, look, They're reusing the uniform from 13 to Centaurus. I'm being kinda scathing here, but I actually do like this. Kinda. I adore the freaky imagery, and there is a cool concept here. It's just very hard to do well, and everything that could mess up, dead. Anyway, that's it for part 3 of my look at Out of the Unknown. I don't think I need to tell you what the best and worst episodes were, but just in case I was being more subtle than usual and you missed that, The Machine Stops is the best, and Lambda 1 is the worst. Next time, we enter level 7, adapted by J.B. Priestley, visit the Tunnel Under the World by Frederik Pohl, and cover all that's left of Series 3, The Last Lonely Man and The Little Black Bag.